What's up, everybody? I am Dan Viens. This is Seahawks Forever, coming to you live once again from Mobile, Alabama, where the hay is in the barn as far as practices go. Both teams wrapped up their final practice session today. They have the day off tomorrow, at least as far as being on the practice field goes, and then the game kicks off 1:30 Central Time on Saturday from Hancock Whitney Stadium on the campus of South Alabama University. As per usual, this week, I will share my thoughts today on what I saw. And today, I focused on the back end on defense, try to get a look at the linebackers and secondary as much as possible, and also the skill positions on offense. Kind of started out, worked my way from inside out and from front to back this week. But I snuck a couple of peeks at the offensive linemen and the quarterbacks, of course, because you just have to do that. So I'll give you my thoughts on guys that popped, flashed, stood out, showed out, any cliche you could think of today on Seahawks Forever. Let's get going.
Welcome to the Seahawks Forever podcast. In-depth analysis on everything Seahawks. And now, here's your host, Dan Viens.
150% sign-up bonus in your first deposit, 125% sign-up bonus on your second and third deposits, up to $2,000 if you sign up for a new account on BetUS today, and you got plenty of time to do it, to get in time to take advantage of all the prop bets and see the current money lines for the big game, the Super Bowl, coming up in just over a week. Welcome back, you guys. Little bit of overcast day, a little windier today. If you caught the recap of the first session that I put up on YouTube, little 5-minute blast, you could hear the wind. Sorry about that. Wasn't able to do a second one from the stadium because I was just having the first one took too long to upload. But for the moment, Wi-Fi looks good. That's why I wanted to hop on, get this done early before peak time. Plus, tonight's the Shrine game from Dallas. Didn't see John Schneider today on the sidelines. Wonder if he went back to Dallas to watch the game. Wonder if that's really all that important, honestly. I think the best exposure that these coaches and scouts get to the players is the practice field, which I think is why today looked like a lot lighter attendance around the edges of the field, both from a media standpoint and just seemed like there were a lot fewer coaches and front office personnel here, which is a little bit interesting given that today was what I thought was the most energetic day from the players, the most intense, the most efficient day. It should be. It's our third day here. And, the first one was kind of feeling around and teaching. They didn't just go through the drills. They had to teach the drills first. So things really moved a lot better today. Also, players get more comfortable. And so I think certain players might show up and show out just a little bit better on day 3. Again, tried to find guys today that I didn't get a good look at or that didn't pop in the first couple of days. There's 130 players here. It's nearly impossible to watch them all up close. I was texting with Bryce Coots of the Hawk Zone Rundown and also my co-host on the Pick Is In podcast, and was telling him that next year I should bring him down with me and we should do this thing together. Just lends itself to being able to split up. One guy watch the offense, one guy watch the defense, or you watch that end of the field, I'll watch this end of the field. And then just for the sake of being able to have a discussion about what we saw during the day instead of me just, blathering into a camera. But that being said, there are some players who are consistently good every day, and that's the storyline for them down here. I would say, just starting out with some general quarterback observations, Tyler Shuck from Louisville impressed me this week, and I think he was the most consistent. Like, the guy that he was on day 1 is the guy he was today. He might have mechanically and physically, he might be the most impressive quarterback down here, just the way he throws the football, the way the ball jumps out of his hand. Accurate. Moves around well for a guy who's 6'5", and I'm intrigued by his experience. So that's one of those guys that when I get home, I'll be able to dig into a little bit deeper and watch some of his film. Really interested to watch some of that, just for an example. Then you get the guys that just seem to get a little bit more comfortable and a little bit better every day. And I would categorize Jackson Dart as being that guy. Like, day one, there was some inconsistencies, some inaccuracies. There were from all of them. But that's to be expected. New receivers, new scheme, new install, having to work from under center for the first time. So I thought he was just really consistently good throughout this week. And then I thought Dart got better each and every day and was clearly yesterday and today, for me, the best quarterback here. And looks like a guy that belongs in the first round if a team chooses to do so. And on that note, I will say, and I'm sure it's just the first of many, many times I'll say it between now and the draft, because quarterbacks just are polarizing by the nature of the position, right? Fans, analysts, fans who consider themselves analysts, you pick a favorite, you decide on a guy, it's hard to change their mind, and you're loyal to that opinion. And so if I just pop one little thing up that, Jackson Dart looks really good today, boom, I get all these notifications about how he sucks and how he doesn't belong in the first round. There were some 12-year-old kids in the stands today talking about how Jackson Dart sucks. But they love Dylan Gabriel, right? Maybe because he's their size. I don't know. That was unfair. Gabriel, by the way, really struggled in the red zone session today, which makes sense. I mean, some of the issues you're going to have by being so small in stature like he is are going to be compounded by shrinking the field, right? It's the wide open spread offense that has been his friend over the 6 years he's played college football and playing with a bunch of receivers, guys like Tez Johnson that can be sudden and get open, and little spread concepts and that are designed to scheme receivers open, right? But that gets compacted and tight in the red zone. So he struggled there. But as far as to get back to my earlier point about Jackson Dart, there is obviously a different parameter that you have to consider when you're talking about quarterbacks. Throw away the idea of whether or not one of them belongs in the first round or not. That just divorce yourself from that concept. It's such a premier position. It's such a hard position to get right unless you're drafting in the top 5. And even then, it's what's the success rate? Less than 50-50 if you go back 10, 15 years. And then the further away you get from the first pick, then that success rate goes down. And so if you find a guy that you believe has a chance to be a good starting quarterback in the NFL for you, you take him. And if you're sitting in the middle or the late part of the first round and you don't have a chance to get Cam Ward or Shadur Sanders, and you're looking at QB3 and you're thinking about Jackson Dart or Will Howard, let's say you're the LA Rams, and let's say they can't work out a new agreement with Matt Stafford, who says he wants to continue playing, and he should. I'm glad to hear him say that. I would hate to see him walk away from the game in his prime. Then you have to consider not just, is this guy worth, quote unquote, the 25th pick or whatever? I think you throw that out the window. And in a vacuum, you ask yourself, do we believe this guy has a chance? Not day one, but in a year, in 2 years, in 3 years, do we think he has a chance to be our guy? And you're sitting at 25 and you don't pick again until 60 or however the math works out, 57, 58, whatever. And you don't think he's going to last until then, but he's a guy you believe in. You just take him at 25. It's that important. You don't worry about, what are people going to think? There's a bunch of people out there that don't think he belongs in the first round. No. I keep thinking about the year that the Seahawks took Rashad Penny in the first round, right? Nobody expected him to go in the first round, although we found out afterwards there were some other teams, most notably the New England Patriots, who were thinking about taking him with their pick in the first round too, if the Seahawks hadn't. But in that case, and maybe this isn't a great analogy because Rashad Penny didn't turn out to have a good career, and it was a pick that a lot of people didn't think was good value for the Seahawks to make. But the idea was they had conviction about this player. They loved this player, and they didn't have a second round pick. So it's a little bit more of an extreme example. And they knew he wouldn't last until they could pick again or even move up into the second round. So they took him when they did. I think we get a little lazy in our analysis when we call players a reach because they go higher than we think they should go, or they go higher than the last big board that we read. These scouts don't give a shit about that. These GMs don't give a crap about that. All they care about is that the guy on our board right now that we want the most for whatever reason? Because he's the highest player on their board and they're sticking to their board no matter what, or because he's a quarterback and they really like him and they want him in their program. They want to try and develop him and they know he won't last until their next pick. That's all that matters. So that's my public service announcement for today, is to try to just get y'all to understand that. But let's get into some players that popped for me. First of all, on the defensive side, and it's kind of hard the way the practice is structured here to really get a feel for how good these linebackers are. A lot of stuff they do is half speed here. It's a lot of 7-on-7 stuff, right? And when they do go full speed, you might see 10 reps and they're rotating in and out. So they're in. And so if a play doesn't come their way, it's kind of tough. And so when I look at safeties, linebackers, inside linebackers, I just try to get a feel for movement skills, quickness. How can they turn their hips? How can they go sideline to sideline, right? Their body type. Are they rocked up? Are they slide a frame? Big, small? Do they seem to be in the right place at the right time? And then in particular, when it comes to safeties and linebackers, do they come into my field of view when I'm not looking at them? Are they around the ball? Are they someone that I always notice when I'm not watching them specifically? Because that's really all you can kind of do down here. It's impossible to watch everyone down here, except for after the fact. And that's what I'll be doing over the next week and a half. When I get home, I'm still going to be doing a bunch of Senior Bowl content next week. They've got a portal where they make the video that they shoot every day available. Tons and tons and tons of it, every drill, every session. And once we leave the event, we're not as bound by time restrictions on how much that video we can use. And so I'll be using that moving forward, just so you know, some of that stuff. So talked about Demetrius Knight out of South Carolina yesterday. He showed up again today. 6'3", 245 is the biggest guy here, and he plays like it around the ball, likes to come forward, good stack and shed player. I think he's a guy you could play on the edge a little bit because of his size and length, and I think that's maybe why he might fit with the Seahawks. I just think he's going to go earlier than it makes sense. You're not taking him in the second round because, assuming you re-sign Ernest Jones, to me that's not a great value pick. That would be a stick to your board no matter what pick if he happens to be at the top of your board when pick 50 comes around. But it's not the smartest pick when filling out your roster, because how's he going to get on the field unless you're using a third linebacker at times or using him off the edge? And Mike McDonald typically likes to do that with an extra safety or a box, a nickel guy. So he's a guy that, if this had been last year, I would have been extremely high on, as high as the second round. But they have Tyrese Knight. We saw a lot of good things about him. Maybe we only need one Knight at inside linebacker. Now, if for whatever reason the Ernest Jones thing goes sideways and he walks, then we'll have a conversation about Demetrius Knight for sure. Another guy that coming into the Senior Bowl I was intrigued by, and I am no less intrigued as I leave, I'm staying until Saturday, is Samael Mondon Jr. from Georgia. Not the biggest name, Georgia linebacker, right? But another guy that's a little bit bigger, a little bit longer. And he's that guy that was always around the ball when I wasn't specifically watching him. Really likes to come up and hit. And has enough speed sideline to sideline that he made himself known this week. Another guy who did is Shamar James out of Florida, clocked the fastest GPS time this week among all linebackers. Really, really quick. And a guy that I want to watch a lot more film of to see how good his cover skills are. And then Jeffrey Bassa, I mentioned him in the little recap after the morning session, from Oregon. Really sturdy, compact frame. Just not quite Ivan Pace size because he's taller. I think he's listed at 6'2". But imagine that kind of musculature. And he was the guy running the show at Mike linebacker, although he seems a little small for that. So, have to see if that's a guy that can play both positions, because I think that's the type of guy the Seahawks are going to be interested in, is someone that can back up at both spots. Right now that guy is Drake Thomas. And while I like Drake Thomas, he's just, he's a 5'10", 5'11" guy. And I think that's a position where some competition could be warranted. Just someone that can play both spots and back up both spots. Safety, again, it's kind of tough for these guys to really make an impression except in one-on-ones, and then they're at a major disadvantage, right? And so these are a couple of players that flashed sort of out of the screen for me, out of my eyesight. Dan Jackson out of Georgia is one. He had a huge hit today on Dan Beck, the TCU wide receiver. Jack Beck, I'm sorry. And smoked him, hit him, timed it up perfectly, put his helmet right in Beck's chest plate. Beck, to his credit, held onto the ball. But it was a really nice play from Jackson to come over and try and knock the ball loose. And then Keandre Jackson out of Illinois State, smaller school guy, had a couple of nice plays in the red zone session, and also in some one-on-one stuff that was also directed at the red zone. A couple of pass breakups and some nice coverage from the safety spot. Corners that stood out for me today, a couple other guys that I wasn't familiar with. Jacob Parrish out of Kansas State had a couple of nice plays. And then Jalen Smith from USC had, I think I said earlier today, they were back-to-back. They weren't, but they were within 3 or 4 plays of each other. Again, down in that end zone area, working into the end zone, had a couple of outstanding coverage reps and pass breakups on those plays. Another guy that I really want to find out a lot more about and watch a lot more closely. As far as the wide receivers go, Beck had another nice day. He's one of those guys, kind of the receiver version of what I said about Tyler Shuck, where you almost kind of overlook him or just take him for granted because he's not flashy. He's not dynamic in his movements, but just gets the job done, catches the ball every time it comes to him, seems to be open. Had that touchdown catch today from Jackson Dart. Had a couple of touchdowns. Had a touchdown from Jalen Milroe today as well. Just looked like a really solid receiver. Ty Felton from Maryland, guy that had 90 plus catches last year and over 1,200 yards. I think tremendous career at Maryland the last 3 seasons. Really, really smooth in his movements, makes it look easy. Some of these guys that are quick in and out of their cuts and good route runners look not, I was going to say mechanical. That's not the right word, because I would consider mechanical to be a negative when it comes to scouting. But just makes it look easy. Just he's decisive. He's definitive in his cuts, but they don't look high effort, right? You know what I'm saying? Some of these receivers, when they go to cut, they cut really sharply and quickly, but they kind of have to put everything into it. Felton just looked really, really smooth. Caught the ball well too. And then 2 other guys that fit into that same category. A lot of receivers that kind of look the same down here. I thought coming into the Senior Bowl, it was a lot of slot guys, and it lacked in some bigger guys on the outside. There aren't a lot of guys like that in the draft. Ted McMillan out of Arizona, but he wasn't going to be here because he's going to go in the top 10. Savion Williams out of TCU, someone asked me about today. He's another guy, 6'4.5", really long. He pulled out. He initially accepted his invitation to come down here and then decided not to. But all these guys, Ty Felton, Jaden Higgins, Iowa State, one of Bryce's favorites, Pat Bryant, Illinois, all guys in that 6'1" to 6'3" range. That look like they could play inside or out. Bryant's a little slighter frame than Higgins is, but these are all guys that I think sort of fit, or at least I did. I'll tell you what I mean by that for a second, in a second. Sort of fit what I think the Seahawks might be looking for this offseason. Talked about it last night. You know, your wide receiver room kind of looking like a basketball team, little different shapes and sizes and skill sets, ideally. And with DK kind of being that alpha dog, you know, that big, rocked up, tall, fast receiver on the outside, he's definitely an X. And then JSN doing most of his damage. I think 80% of the balls he caught this year were from the slot. I thought the Seahawks need to add another player kind of like JSN, can play some slot, but also can play outside. And maybe a little bit bigger, taller, can take the top off. Sure, you always want a guy like that. But like 6'1", 6'2", that body type, just kind of smooth in and out of breaks that can get open and do everything. That's a little better route runner than DK, a little bit more complete, but maybe a little bit more physically imposing than JSN. I'm not so sure anymore because Clint Kubiak runs so much 12 and 13 personnel. Now, maybe he'll adapt that up here. I think the Seahawks are going to be looking a little heavier at tight end in this draft cycle than receiver. And if they do look to draft a receiver, I think it might make more sense to target one of those other guys that's more of a slot demon, a guy like Tez Johnson, right? Because I think he would give you something much different than you have. And I think JSN is capable of playing on the outside. And if you're going to be playing a lot of 12 and 13 personnel, he's going to be playing the outside because in a lot of those formations, then you're only going to have DK and JSN out there. So maybe someone has a little change of pace, can take some jet sweeps, right? Can do some of that stuff, would make a little more sense. Which I think just kind of opens a lot of things up because there are a lot of those guys here I've talked about. And a lot of those guys just playing in the game in general. And then when it comes to running backs, again, this is a really good class. You've heard that. You've heard as many as 30 draftable running backs, all shapes and sizes. Jim Nagy talked about it. Whatever you want. You want the third down guy, kind of the quick, outstanding receiver, Trevor Etienne out of Georgia. Looks the part, right? His reputation preceded him when he got here. You know, some people are disappointed with the production at Georgia because of the name, they were expecting more, but you know, he looks good. It was reported actually this morning that he was going to pull himself out because he's had a couple of good days. That was not the case, and he was on the field today. But there are a couple other guys too. They all look good. There's 9 guys here, and they're all really intriguing. They're all pretty sturdily built. They all none of them shy away from physicality and pass protection. They all look nimble and quick and have good vision. They all catch the ball well, right? Some of them are bigger. I just don't think the Seahawks are going to be drafting a running back this year. You look at the room and you can say, yeah, but Kenneth Walker, I don't know if they're going to extend him. Okay, well, where are you going to house this guy on the roster? If you take one of these really good backs in the 4th or 5th round, where are you going to house him on the roster? Because they really liked what they got from Kenny McIntosh at the end of last year when he finally got some ops. We all did. And they love George Halani. And so I just don't know that there's an opportunity there. I usually say going into a draft, if there's a position group that's particularly good in any given year, dip into that, tap into that, take one of those guys. I don't think that's the case with running back this year. Unless they trade down, pick up extra picks, I think I'd be a little disappointed if they take a guy because I just don't know where he's going to fit on the roster. Unless you're trading Kenneth Walker, and I don't think they're doing that because I think Clint Kubiak probably took this job for a bunch of reasons, and one of them might be, I think in an outside zone scheme that I like to run, I think Kenneth Walker could be really dynamic. So, but there are still some other guys that popped out to me. Marcus Yarns out of Delaware is a guy that every time I keep losing track of who's in which session. And there have been so many times the last couple of days where I've looked down and gone, oh, that's another good rep for Donovan Jackson out of Michigan. Oh, no, that's Marcus Yarns. Jackson's on the national team and he practiced in the morning because Delaware has the same helmet design, right? But he's really quick and really sudden and really compact. Little bit of Justin Forsett kind of build to my eye. sometimes that can deceive, if I go look at his dimensions now, I might think that he's, well, here it is right here. Let me just look at it. Let me look at Marcus Yards real quick. Because I just want to see, I think he's one of the smaller guys compared to some of the other guys that are here. All right. So he is, 5'10", 189. So he is a smaller back, built almost exactly the same as Kyle Williams, the wide receiver from Washington State, just to give you a little bit of context there. But he has caught my eye over and over and over again. And a guy that looks like, once he gets a crease, he can take it to the house. And then Bershul Tootin from Virginia Tech is another guy that I want to watch a lot more of. Kind of low to the ground, thick, sturdy build. Another guy that just, even when I wasn't watching the running backs, he kept attracting my attention. So someone to watch a lot more film on. And that'll be certainly be interesting and fun. Let's see. We've got some comments and questions from y'all. Dogzilla Monster, usually first. Appreciate that about you. Mbaku says, did I say that right? Thanks for the awesome coverage. Love the energy and insight you bring. I appreciate that. I appreciate you all. Appreciate the support. Certainly. Don't forget to subscribe if you're not already. And the other ways you can support the channel are down below. Big debut at the Senior Bowl. Good job, Dan. Guillermo. I will tell you this. I've learned a lot while I'm down here. I've talked about how some of it came right back to me muscle memory wise about how to cover a big event. But I wasn't sure what to expect down here because I've never covered it. I thought there would be a lot more time to kind of rub elbows with some of the other media and analysts down here and get some time to interview some of those guys. I did run into Emory Jones from CBS Sports today, who writes the great draft guide that he puts out every year. And you've seen him here on the show. And it was nice to meet him in person, but he's so busy. He's got a flight to catch. And during the sessions, he's watching what's happening on the field. So I didn't get a chance to get him on camera today. And then there's a bunch of people working down here from some of the bigger outlets, but they have access to this certain area where they can record their podcasts right on site there on the concourse. And I don't know if that's something that I had available to me. And maybe when I was filling out the credential form, I just didn't check the right box or something. But I've talked to Bryce about coming down here with me next year because I think it would be advantageous to team up on this thing, be able to shoot video for each other, have one operate the camera while the other one's interviewing someone, and then to be able to just do a show together. Bring all your equipment to the stadium and everything else. So some of those guys, like I saw Trevor Sikkema today, but I'm not the type to bother people when they're working, and they also, when they're on the other side of a fence, that seems a little inappropriate. So not as many opportunities to do some of that stuff. And then the bigger media names, those guys are on the field. We don't have access to that. All of us, like content creators, podcasters, are up in the stands. But it was also cool to see there's a lot of us here. And kudos to Jim Nagy and the Senior Bowl staff and Molly, what's her last name? Middleton, I think, who is in charge of the media down here, has done a really, really great job to being open-minded to non-traditional media and letting us to come and cover this. As I've said before, like some of the teams in the NFL are really open about that. Some are really tight. The Seahawks are one of them. That door has always been closed unless you work for a major media outlet with call letters attached to it. Like the application forms to get credentials to a lot of these events, like the Combine, what are your call letters? The Seahawks may have cracked that door open a little bit with Brian, and he's done such a phenomenal job at it that might be an opportunity down the road. But as far as an event like this, I think the Senior Bowl is kind of out in front of that, and really appreciate that. Because I looked around the stands today and I could hear the conversation and people talking about their podcasts and everything else, and heard some really, really cool conversations, overheard some things and people talking about what was going on in the field and stuff. So a lot of passion here and a lot of people that really enjoy doing this and work hard at it. So it's cool to see that the Senior Bowl gave us a chance to do that. Doug Zillemonster, exactly. Draft position's way overrated. If you like a guy, take him. I believe very, very, very firmly in this. And I can tell you that most GMs and most teams operate this way. They do not care what anyone thinks about the pick, only that it checks a box for them and makes their team better. That's all that matters. If you have conviction about a player and you love a player at any position and you don't think there's any chance he's going to get to your next pick, you don't, these GMs aren't going, oh, geez, let's look at the New York Times consensus big board. No, guys, that's 20 spots higher than they say it's supposed to be. We can't do that. Nobody cares about that. If they do, they're not going to be a GM in the NFL very long. They're not going to make it. You're going to end up like the kid GM from Jacksonville in the movie Draft Day, getting taken advantage from Sonny Weaver when he calls you to trade all your second round picks. So yeah, that's just something that I used to feel the same way. Oh my God, that's such a reach. Is he a good player? And I think here's a good example of that. Here's the best example I can think of how I've become wiser in that area. Seahawks took Tyrese Knight last year in the 4th round. Everything I had read about him leading up to the draft, not my own evaluation, because, I watched a couple of games of all 22 from him, but honestly, I've said this before. I've never coached at a high level. Like, when I see a good player, and I'm sure I'm seeing a good player, I'll tell you that I'm seeing a good player. Same with a bad player. Didn't know what to think about Knight. And so I lean on the knowledge of others. And there were so many people saying he was a flawed player. And I remember reading, Griffin Sturgeon didn't like him at all, at least as far as being a fit for the Seahawks. And that he was just super raw. And a lot of the tackles he got was lower level of competition, et cetera, et cetera. And so when they took him, I thought, ooh, that's high. And then from the moment he stepped on the practice field, he just looked like he belonged. And by the time he got a chance to start, after they traded Jerome Baker, he really looked the part. And now he looks like a guy who could be a long-term fixture at weak side linebacker for the Seahawks. So I had already kind of started to become more forgiving and understanding of draft position, but that was kind of the final one for me where I was like, okay, I'm just going to stop paying attention to that anymore, especially when it comes to the Seahawks. Because how many times do you see someone go to the podium during the draft and in your mind, you've already got like 3 or 4 names locked and loaded, right? Guys that you want the pick to be. And if you're like me, you watch the mouth as they come up to the podium, you watch their mouth. You try to get that first, you want to see the first syllable, right? And I remember when they took Abe Lucas, like that was one of the names. And I was so blown away that they actually took a player that I thought they should take in that spot. I couldn't quite believe what I was hearing, because usually they do things a little bit differently, right? So I've learned, maybe not perfectly, I'm not promising it'll never happen again, but I've learned to kind of take a step back and go, okay, they obviously see something in that guy. Doesn't mean they're always right. Obviously, DJ James last year didn't make the team, didn't even make someone's practice squad for a couple months after that. Like, looks like he's not going to be a player in the league. So they missed that evaluation. Obviously, the later in the draft you get, right? But they put so much work into this. They don't just wake up on draft day and go, all right, let's take some shots. They put a ton of work. And obviously it takes time to bear out how good those picks are going to be. But draft position is so overrated. And I'll tell you this, for those of you who have a hard time letting go of that, keep in mind what they're saying about this class. What I said last night, like from picks 20-ish to 60-ish, one analyst said same player, which is a good thing, means it's really good. There's no drop off in the second round. Really, really balanced. Not as much high-end talent, not as many blue chippers, the can't miss, no doubters, right? But after that, tons of good players. And that is going to lend itself even more to some surprises. Guys getting picked much higher or lower than they expected. Some of you like to bring up that the Seahawks could have had Dominic Pooney last year instead of Christian Haynes. That's 2020 hindsight. because almost universally Christian Haynes was rated as a better prospect than Dominic Pooney, but Pooney was a guy that I really liked too. And so the popular kind of reaction to the fact that Haynes wasn't able to win a starting job his rookie year is, well, they should have taken Pooney because look what he did for the 49ers. Well, the point I'm trying to get at, when Pooney was drafted ahead of the Haynes pick, my first reaction was, wow, he wasn't supposed to go that high. So I think you're going to see more of that this year, because when the talent levels is even as it is, teams have a different set of evaluation process. They have different things that they're looking for, different things they want. Like John Schneider says, he says, we draft and we grade for our roster, not for the league, which is again, his way of saying we don't give a shit what other people think about our process. Am I going to watch the East West Shrine Bowl tonight, Dan? Absolutely. Heck yes. It's one of the things I'm most looking forward to. I'm glad it worked out this way. It's going to be on at 7:00 Central Time here, so it'll be 5:00 back on the Pacific Coast for you guys. Most of you guys. I know you're not all from the West Coast. Can't wait to watch it. Was thinking about doing a live watch party, but I just want to really focus in and take some notes. And then I'm going to do a couple shows tomorrow. So day off tomorrow. We have nothing going on, and I have a couple different goals. One is I'll do a show. Well, both of them will be on this channel, but I'll do a show about guys that are making money, right? That's a popular term you hear here in Mobile, is guys that made themselves some money this week, and I'll put some video with it and everything else, and kind of give you my probably top 10 list of players that made themselves money this week. And then I'll do another one with my impressions of the Shrine Bowl. And guys that I thought stood out and really intrigued me from a Seahawks standpoint. One guy right off the top of my head that I can't wait to see play this evening is Kyle McCord. All the reports are that he's killing it in practice this week, that he looks outstanding. And I wish he was here. I wish a couple of guys were here. This quarterback class down here, as much as y'all, like some of you like to slam on this class and dismiss it as not being any good. Man, the Senior Bowl class could have been really, really good if Will Howard had decided to make it, and if Quinn Ewers had been here. I'm sure Ewers got an invite. I think with him, it's probably he needs to get healthy, and he needs to heal up that oblique and everything and get ready for the combine. I think that's really important for him. But man, that would have been, could you imagine like this class, if it had been on one side, Howard, Shuck, Ewers, and then on the other side, Leonard, Milroe, Dart, that would have been pretty cool. It's been great seeing Elgersma here, the Canadian kid. And again, he continues to look like a really, really intriguing process. Now, I don't know that he's going to be drafted. I don't know how scouts view the experience of playing in Canada and that level of competition and the different rules up there, and how they're going to weight that versus what they saw here. Because guys come down here every year and look really, really good. I'll never forget the year that Mike White came down and tore it up down here. What has he accomplished, right? So I'm not sure he's draftable, but my goodness, he would be a priority free agent and a guy that would be fun to have on the practice squad and try to develop. And it's been cool to see Dylan Gabriel here, to see him in this environment. But it would have been really great to see those other guys. And McCord here would have been cool too. I don't know for a fact if he was invited here and chose the Shrine game. He might have, kind of knowing and understanding where he fits into the class. Maybe he thought, gosh, if I go to Mobile, I'm not going to get the reps that I want. Where you can kind of go to the Shrine game and you're the guy, and he's probably going to get a lot of run there tonight. So I'm really excited to see him and some of those other small school guys that traditionally play in the Shrine game. Not that they all do. There's some other guys there that I really want to see as well. Let's see. Lawrence says, sorry, just hopped on 5 minutes ago. Is Mike Green a legit option, the edge out of Marshall? I don't think so, because I don't think he lasts till 18. He's one of the guys that went home yesterday after performing really well. Trey Amos, Ole Miss corner, and then one of the linemen too took off. I can't remember who now off the top of my head, but yeah, I don't think Green's going to be there at 18. If he was, like, he's not going to fit every scheme. He's got those 32.5-inch arms, but I would sure as heck think he would fit a Mike McDonald scheme because he's a guy that you can move around, can be versatile. You can play him off the ball a little bit, play him on the edge, play him in a 2-point stance. I thought he looked better than I expected him to, holding up against the run. I've talked often the last couple of years about how I like Boye Mafe and I like Derek Hall, but neither of those guys are sudden. They win with power for the most part. And even Chenna kind of fits that mold. None of those guys are sudden, and it's something that I think is lacking in this defense. Is a guy that can just flat out beat you sometimes off the edge. And not to say that Green is just a finesse player, a quick player that wins with burst, because we saw the rep yesterday where he absolutely destroyed Connerly from Oregon, one of the top-rated tackles here, by just hitting him in the chest plate and knocking him on his ass. He's got some power to him, and I think that's what really opened some eyes down here. Those 17 sacks didn't all just come because he was, beating lower level tackles to the edge. If he's there at 18, I'm sprinting to the podium and taking him, and I'm screaming at the TV to please take him. But I don't think he's going to be there. Now, if he's a guy that Mike McDonald wants for his defense and thinks is a difference maker in that defense, can you trade up a few spots to get him? I don't know. They would have two things at their disposal. One is there's that extra fourth, right? But also the idea that next year's draft is considered to be better at the top. And so maybe you can trade if you really feel, again, conviction. You hear me say that word a lot. If you believe a guy is a difference maker in your program, then he's worth trading assets for. So maybe you can add on a 26 pick in order to move up a few spots. I don't know. Because it's a good edge class overall. I think Green's the most dynamic edge pass rusher in this class, not named Abdul Carter. But there's some other good ones too. And so I think value-wise, that might not make sense for the Seahawks with where they are right now, unless that's a dude that McDonald really wants. And he was here today. I didn't see Schneider, but McDonald was here kind of front and center on some of these drills, right on the sideline, watching these guys. It took full advantage of being here this week. Because remember, he wasn't able to attend this game last year because he hadn't been hired yet. So his first experience, I'm sure he's been here as a member of the Ravens staff before, but not as a head coach. And he was quite visible on the sidelines all 3 days. Adam Prim says, any fullbacks? I know Kubiak used a fullback. Was it Prentice, the kid that he used in New Orleans? Then obviously, like, Taysom Hill played some fullback, right? Talked about this last night a little bit. I don't know that a true fullback is going to be a need because I think Kubiak also likes to just play with 2 back sets, and you can do some of that. You can also use a tight end. I did find it interesting today that Harold Fannin Jr., the prolific tight end from Bowling Green who caught 107 balls last year, lined up at fullback a couple of times today. Doesn't really look like the body type. He's got kind of skinny legs, but he's pretty strong, and he seems to be a willing blocker. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Which on that note, got into a little bit of a debate today on Twitter. Fannin hasn't really impressed me down here that much. Had a couple nice catches in the red zone session today. But he has a very weird running style. He's very upright, very short, choppy steps. He's not the most fluid athlete. And, I kind of pushed back on this one aggregator account that I finally had to unfollow because their style that they write in, it's all unattributed and they use quotes for everything. And I just hate it. So I had to get rid of it. But it started a conversation. I love a good debate. And I got a lot of pushback when I said, because the report was with the air quotes again. that Fannin had separated himself from all the other tight ends here at the Senior Bowl and moved himself into potentially being tight end 3 behind Loveland and Warren. I don't see that at all. I think Elijah Arroyo and Mason Taylor have been better than he. And part of the reason is not just level of competition. They're just smoother athletes. They look like basketball players out there. A lot of the qualities I look for in a tight end, both those guys have it in droves. And so I put them slightly above him. Now, that being said, I haven't watched any real tape on Fannin. I'll do that when I get back. He'll be one of the players I'll follow up on. I'll have a better evaluation later when I break down the tight ends. But he's a guy that I want to see at the combine. Like that's where I think his evaluation can really take off or go the other way. Like that's when you can see just how fluid, how sudden, how quick, how natural a player is just running routes and running drills. So I think that might be a big day for him. Let's see what else we got. Okay. Metal Dragon says it's probably better you're not streaming on site. Brian did from there yesterday and it's not ideal. Yeah. I don't know if those guys had wired internet available to them there or not. There's wired internet in the press box, but I wasn't given access to the press box during the week. I do have access to the press box during the game. And I know it's a little limited up there. So that's actually my goal to cover the game is I'm going to try to get there right when the gates open, get there as early as possible and get a spot in the press box. I want to be able to watch the game from that angle so I can see everything in front of me. I can have wired internet. I can react and be tweeting all throughout the game. I can upload little videos or whatever and then kind of compare what I see from up there, sort of eye in the sky, to what I see on the television copy when I get back and watch the replay later that night. So that's my plan for that. Yeah. Arif does that consensus big board every year where he basically takes all the good big boards and compiles them into one. I'm sort of doing a similar thing for the Pick Is In pod. I've got like a top 97 right now. And then once I get back from this, I'll spend the next couple of weeks sort of taking that consensus and then tweaking it sort of to match my own observations and ultimately coming up with my own top 100 big board, which I've never really formally done before, but will do this year. Zach, someone will be there that a team will pay a ransom for to trade up with Seattle to get to 18. Is that what you're saying? For somebody like a Mike Green, is that kind of what you're thinking? This might be that kind of draft. I mentioned it last night, whereas the last couple of years, like trading back hasn't really made sense. I think this year it might. The fact that, again, let's take that concept that from pick 20 to 60 basically is the same level of player. That means as you get to that ledge, you get to 18, 19, 20, teams may have different flavors. Different things that they're looking for. They may fall in love with the player that you're not in love with. And that might kind of lend itself to teams wanting to move up or down. And so, yeah, if one of those edge rushers falls that a team's in love with, but they're not your dude, and they want to come up and get him, yeah. Or if the Seahawks are just dead set against taking a quarterback high in the draft this year and Dart or Howard falls to 18, and by that point, they're seen as a first-round pick. Team wants to come up and get them. You can leverage that. One of these running backs, after Genty, maybe running back 2, a team's worried that there's going to be a running back run at the end of the first round. They might want to jump up and get their guy. If a team falls in love with Judkins, for example, right? I think this could be one of those drafts, and it's something I've started to play around with a little bit more in mock simulators to move from 18 into sort of the mid-20s, get you a late 2 or early 3rd. And that's really intriguing to me in this draft. If 20 to 60 is the same level of player, then I want to take multiple bites out of that apple. And right now the Seahawks would only have one pick between 20 and 60. I'd like to add a couple more. That'd be kind of cool. I mean, this is the big question, right? Corey asks at 18, who's the best offensive lineman you think would be available based on your review thus far? I've said that I think Gray Zabel is the most impressive offensive lineman here, the kid from NDSU. especially on the interior. He played tackle at NDSU, a lot of tackle, but he'd have limitations there. I think teams see him as a guard. He played more center today. I think there's a good chance he's gotten into the first round. I think there's a good chance he's there at 18. How much are the Seahawks going to address their offensive line before the draft? That's the big question. If they ignore it and go into the draft intent on finding a guy there, then Zabel, to me, would be a preference. Maybe he's not the kind of guy they're looking for. That wouldn't make sense to me, but you know, it's all about scheme fit and style, and teams have different parameters, right? I don't see how you can watch Gray Zabel's game and not like it. But how much are you going to address the position before then? Because if they go out and they sign a really good left guard in free agency or a veteran center, if they sign a center, I talked about this last night, in Clint Kubiak's system, there's a lot more pressure, a lot more responsibility on the center. He takes things off the quarterback's plate. Quarterback doesn't have to make all the protection calls and everything. He wants to simplify it for them. The center does that. And so maybe you do want to go invest in the last couple of years of a Ryan Kelly's career because of that experience. That might leave an opening on left guard if you spend significant money on center in free agency. For me, what I've been expecting and saying all along is I expect them to invest in a guard. And I'm not saying Trey Smith. I don't think it makes sense to spend $25 million to get the number one guy out there and fight all these other teams that are going to be bidding for him. Find a guy that you think can come in day one and be a stud and improve your offensive line as a veteran at left guard. That's the best way you can set yourself up for the draft. If you do that, then I'm not so sure adding a guy like Gray Zabel makes a lot of sense at 18, because you just drafted a bunch of guys in the last 2 years too. Are you giving up on all those players? Are you just washing all those draft picks out the door? I don't know. I tend to believe the closer we get to this draft, and Jesus, we're not close. We're 3 months away. They're going to address offensive line in free agency in such a way. They have enough young bodies there. I don't think adding another rookie to that group is how you're going to make them as good as we want them to be week one. You got to do it with veterans. They don't have to all be studs, right? But, you know, sign one good one at least. I think they're going to take the most dynamic player possible at 18 and then fill in with best need available after that. And I think that could very, very potentially be an edge rusher, one of these edge guys. The interior guys, I think, are going to be gone by then. Now, you've seen Kenneth Grant from Michigan mock to the Seahawks a bunch because they do need a nose tackle. I just think that's high for him. And there's some guys in this draft that you can get to play that position, play the 0 tech or the 1 tech later on. The way this talent group shapes up, 18 right now for me screams edge guy. There's a bunch of bigger guys in this class, 6'5", 6'6", 280, 290, but with some juice to get after the passer. I think that's a need to supplement that group and also just to keep adding to it moving forward. And even, you know, guys that aren't here, a guy like Jalen Walker, who could be a chess piece. You know how Mike McDonald loves those guys with versatility, a guy you can move all around, play off-ball linebacker, but bring him up on the edge too, kind of like Malik Harrison did for him in Baltimore. You know, somebody like that, someone with some juice. And I think they'll look to add talent at those trench positions later on. That's just how I feel right now. That could change between now and then, obviously. And if one of those tight ends falls, if Tyler Warren's there at 18, you run to the podium. I think Colson Loveland is another guy that could fit into that category, because I think with the scheme that Kubiak is bringing, I think tight end becomes a big priority. Is Walter Nolan, Murphy, Leo line feasible in the Mike Mack vision? Guillermo, Nolan's been great down here, but he's a guy who's, what is he, 281? Let's see what his official Senior Bowl measurements were. 6'3", 293, 33-inch arms, 79.5-inch wingspan, 9.5-inch hands. I feel like Nolan might be a little bit redundant with Murphy. And I'm not saying they're the same player. I'm saying I want to get a bigger, more stout guy. I want to get a nose tackle in here that can free up Murphy to focus solely on 3 technique, or to be able to switch positions and move around a little bit with Leo. I feel like Nolan's kind of that same dude. So I'm not so sure about that. That being said, at 18, he'd be tremendous value. And again, that's a really good example of one of those picks where if they take Nolan at 18, don't worry about fit. Obviously, Mike McDonald has a plan for that guy. You don't just take, when John says best player available, you don't just take the best player available blindly if he's redundant to something else you have. And I think the thing that gets overlooked a little bit that John has talked about in the past is, a lot was made last year, was it the year before? And I can't remember who wrote the story, where John talked about, like, in the early part of the draft, we just stick to our board, right? Best player available. And then later in the draft, we draft for need. But then he says we incorporate need into the draft grade. So it's already baked in. So if you get to 18, right, and Nolan's there and he's got a great grade from you as far as all his traits, and he loves ball, he's the kind of guy you want in your locker room, all those things, but they don't think it's a need on the roster, then his grade will reflect that, and he probably won't be the top guy on the board at 18 if that's the case. So that being said, if they take Walter Nolan at 18, get excited because he's a fun player, and it would mean that McDonald has a plan for him. Sean Thompson, Dan, did you see any potential second or third round quarterbacks you like? Awesome show. Thanks, Sean. It's hard to peg where these guys are going to be drafted right now. But when you just look at the group as a whole, guys that I think have the potential upside to be starters in the league that are here at the game, right? Jackson Dart, without a doubt. Jalen Milroe, he's the most raw. He's the most polarizing. His bad reps are the worst of the quarterbacks that are here, but his good reps are the best. He had his best day today by far. And somebody responded to that on Twitter and said, so the best of his 3 bad days? To which I said, that's not how I scout, right? Look at what a player can do, not what he can't. Jalen Milroe is only 21 years old. He's got a lot of learning left to do. And his good throws are wow worthy. And he had a bunch of those today, especially throwing the ball deep. And we know about the athletic ability. So he's one. And that might be it. If you're talking first, second, or third round, those might be the only 2 in the conversation. I've been impressed with Tyler Shuck, but I think he's a day 3 guy. Dylan Gabriel's definitely a day 3 guy. And honestly, Dylan Gabriel's a guy you take in the 6th round, and you just kind of hope that you lock down your backup quarterback spot on a rookie contract for quite a while. He's not a guy you build around. Seth Hennigan shouldn't be here. I wish one of those other guys was. Elgersma is a project. And Riley Leonard's a day 3 guy too. Now, Leonard's a guy that I think you can draft, and he can develop into a high-end backup that if your starter gets hurt, he can come in and win you a couple of games. I don't know that he's more than that. He's a guy who's going to be around the league a long time, though. He's a really hard worker, great attitude. He's that guy that when everybody else is gone from the practice field, he's still there. There's a picture that I saw on Twitter today that was taken from the tunnel. It was a great picture. And the whole stadium's empty. There's no more practice this year at the Senior Bowl. All the players are in the locker room changing. And Riley Leonard's way over there signing autographs for kids in the stands still. But I think if you're asking which guys have a chance to go in the first 3 rounds, it's just those 2 out of this group. Thank you for the super thanks. PGZ206, how did Dart look? He looked great. He was the best quarterback here. Looks like a starter. I'm scared to death the Rams are going to take him. I think he has McVay written all over him. And with every day that goes by and they don't work out a new deal with Stafford, now that he said, I want to be here, that gets a little tricky. What if they trade Matthew Stafford? What if they trade Stafford to the Raiders? How much sense does that make? Right? Give Matthew Stafford to Darrell Bevell and Pete Carroll behind an offensive line that has some good pieces, and they'll improve it this year. They got to add some weapons, obviously. But what if they decide at 6 they're not going to get Sanders or Ward, or they don't have conviction on one of those guys? Pete's 73 years old. They don't want to wait around forever. Stafford would make a lot of sense. If the Rams don't want to give him a new deal with guaranteed money and they trade him, I think Jackson Dart becomes a big-time target for Sean McVay. I don't want any part of that. I don't know why people, unless they're just trying to be trolls, why they can look at a guy like Dart and just say there's no chance. I don't want any part of him. Like, I really question your scouting ability, your judgment, if you look at him and think that. Now, that being said, I'm not saying that he's going to be an all-pro. I'm not even saying that he's going to make it, because look at the history of quarterback draft picks in the NFL. Like, there's a chance he won't. But if he goes to a place like LA, yeah, Stetson Bennett ain't the guy. That's a fit for me. I think he's a player. And if the Seahawks took him at 18 and decided that's their Jordan Love, and they want to sit him behind Geno for a couple of years, I would not bat an eye. Not bat an eye at all. I'm saying at this point, PGZ, I think it's a probability he goes in the first. Someone's going to. It's not just going to be these two guys. There's too many needs. And again, teams look at what a player can do, and they don't focus so much on what they can't do. I think there's a chance that Dart goes in the first. I think there's a chance that Dart and Howard end up going in the first. And that's, of course, without seeing anything from Howard in the draft process. Like, he's got to nail it, obviously. Choosing not to be here, I think the combine becomes really important for Will Howard. I hope he throws at the combine. I hope all these guys throw. I always do. I wonder, and one of these days I'll get to talk to somebody from a front office and ask him, like, how much of your evaluation process do you take those kinds of things into consideration? Because if you decide not to throw at the combine, to me, I'm putting a little check mark next to your evaluation that says, I slightly question your competitiveness. Like, I want a guy who does not care if he goes out and has a bad day. So I hope they all throw. Always compete, right? Isn't it so cool that always compete now gets combined with, or win forever? Win forever now gets to be kind of fused together with just win, baby. I'm so happy for Pete, you guys. I never held any ill will to him. I was one of those who months before he was fired said it was time. It was time for him to move on. Sometimes it just is. You know, sometimes coaches wear out their welcome and then they go kill it somewhere else. We've seen that in all sports. We see it a lot in baseball, right? The message just gets old, and then a guy goes somewhere else and just dominates. I couldn't be happier for him, and I think it's a perfect situation for him. I honestly think the Raiders just there were a couple guys they wanted, but the pool sucked. The hiring pool sucked. Teams need to maybe be a little slower on the trigger to fire their head coaches the next couple of years, because they don't just grow on trees. And some of these like young guys that we think are going to, Bobby Slowick got multiple head coaching interviews a year ago. Now he's unemployed because he couldn't even cut it as a coordinator in his second year. So I think that's a perfect spot for Pete. There's some pieces in place for him. And here's the thing. I had said that if Pete's going to get back into coaching at this point in his career and his age, what I believe he needs to do is take a step back. Just be a coach your philosophy and build your culture and develop players and people and let your coaches coach. So the idea that he's going to bring in Bevell and let him run the offense, and a guy that he trusts and knows, and that the reports are, I don't know if it's official yet, but as of yesterday anyway, that they were going to retain Patrick Graham, who's a very well-respected defensive coordinator, and would keep that continuity down there and just let him coach the defense. Of course, you're going to have input, but just let him do it. I think Pete can write an amazing final chapter to his story. And he's got Max Crosby and Christian Wilkins to build a defense around. Are you kidding me? right? And he's got a draft coming up with 30 draftable running backs in it. He's got to get a quarterback. But yeah, I'm watching that team closely this offseason. I'm going to be fascinated to see what they could do. He goes out and gets a guy like Matthew Stafford, or trades for Geno, drafts Ashton Genty at 6. Here we go. Here goes Pete and the Raiders. Metal Dragon says, Dart's my QB3 right now, and I agree if they take him at 18, I'd be fine with it, but it's still so early. It's subject to change. 100%. And again, if that happens, I'd be happy with it because it means they believe and it means John believes. And his eye for quarterbacks, he hasn't pulled the trigger on it very often, but his eye has been pretty good. In a perfect world, I'd much rather get a dude at 18. Seahawks need some blue chip players. They need some difference makers. I'd rather get a dude like that at 18 on either side of the ball and then be able to get a guy like Kyle McCord or Will Howard later. But, you know, that's if those guys are available. We'll see. We'll see how the process plays out, right? This is kind of funny. Pete back in the NFL and Belichick in the NCAA, because that's a great point, Misfit. I kind of thought if Pete was going to come back and coach again, that college would have made all the sense in the world. Like, a lot of coaches are turned off by the NIL thing nowadays, but Pete's paid players in college before, right? That's a joke. That's a total joke. I don't know if he ever paid. He says he didn't have any knowledge of what happened with Reggie Bush. Fine. That was a joke. Yeah, I kind of thought maybe you'd go run a college program, right? But the fact Belichick's in college and Pete's in the pros, that's pretty cool. I think Pete's got a chance to solidify. And I've asked people on the show recently whether Pete's a Hall of Fame coach, and the answer I always get is yes. But if he goes and wins with the Raiders, he doesn't even have to win a Super Bowl. He gets them to be a playoff team. They have a couple of good seasons before he steps away. He hands it off to somebody else. Maybe Patrick Graham is that guy. You know, remember the Seahawks interviewed Patrick Graham twice last year. I think he was one of the guys that got 2 interviews, and I had Hondo Carpenter on the show who covers the Raiders to talk about it. Yeah, Krusty Rags says Raiders are going to be fun to watch. I just think it's such an inspired hire. Sometimes teams just get it right. And the Raiders had gotten it wrong for so long that it's fun to see them make the right call. Yeah, Bill Anderson says, became a Raiders fan as soon as Pete got hired. I've always felt this way too. You're allowed to root for another team if you're a passionate fan of a certain team, as long as they're in the other conference, right? Like, I've really enjoyed the Cincinnati Bengals the last couple of years. They've kind of been my second favorite team. Fun to watch. It's Raiders now, baby. I might have to. Oh my God, I'm such a merch slut. I've already bought a couple of Senior Bowl things, and boy, there were some things calling my name today. Could I actually buy a Raiders hat? I don't know. That might be taking it a little too far. I don't know if I'll do that. Dogzilla says, I prefer to look at their college careers. A few days at the Senior Bowl combine won't change the process much for me. Absolutely. You take it all into account. And I do think there's a lot of hyperbole that comes out of these weeks. You know, we might be overvaluing Gray Zabel, because while he has been a stud all week long in the individual sessions, the best guys aren't here. He's not going one-on-one against Abdul Carter or Mason Graham, or even Jalen Walker for that matter, or Nick Scorton. And so you have to take all of that into account, just add it to the puzzle. You can't overrate or underrate. That's why, you know, if you've seen some of the bad reps from Jalen Milroe down here this week, don't write him off. Or you see a great throw from Tyler Shuck, don't push him into the second round. It's just one rep. It's just one day. It's just 1 week. It's just one part of the process. Misfit here says, I'm of the philosophy you don't waste a pick on a QB unless you believe there is a strong chance of becoming your franchise QB. Very late picks are different, of course. Absolutely. And that's why I say if they take a guy at 18, and the one, Dart's the one that makes the most sense there. I know I said I think Will Howard has a chance to get into the first round. He has a tougher road to climb, I think. But if you take one there, you better have conviction. I don't want to hear later that, well, let's take a shot. No, I want to hear, we really believe that this guy can be a top end starting quarterback in the league. Absolutely. Rockman says, did you sneak some Reese's peanut butter cups? Oddly enough, there aren't any anywhere. I expected to walk into the stadium and just see Reese's candy everywhere. I had to stop at Target the other day and pick up a couple of things. There was a dollar store right next to it. And I went over and grabbed some candy. I have a terrible sweet tooth, right? I've been doing better lately, but needed some candy. And I bought some mini Reese's Fast Break bars because those are delicious. That's an underrated elite candy to go right along with the peanut butter cups. But I had to have something because they weren't giving it away. Drove me crazy. At the convention center before the media day on Monday, or the press conference and the media day yesterday, they did have some bags of like Hershey's miniatures out. I was like, it's not the Hershey's Senior Bowl. It's the Reese's Senior Bowl. I don't know. Are they owned by the Hershey's company? But like, it looked like somebody forgot and they're just like, well, just stop at the store and pick up one of those Halloween bags. I don't know. Yeah. Oh, I hadn't heard this about Brian, that he's sick. There is some talk of a lot of stuff going on down here in this part of the country. I saw a map yesterday. Bird flu or something, not bird flu, it was something else. But Georgia was empty. Like all the states around it were blacked out, but no cases yet in Georgia. So fingers crossed. Hopefully I get back without getting sick. I got to say hi to Brian on day one, but just a fist bump. We didn't get too close. So sorry to hear that. Hope he feels better. Let's see. What are we talking about here, Guillermo? You'll jump out your window in the third. Are you talking about Dart? Yeah, he ain't going to be there in the third or fourth round. Third or fourth round quarterbacks. Look at the history. Those are lottery tickets, right? And what are you basing that on? Like, again, if the Seahawks take Jackson Dart at 18, doesn't it tell you they believe he can be a franchise quarterback? So you're saying your evaluation skills are better than John Schneider and Matt Berry and all those guys in their front office? Okay. Yeah, Metal Dragon says testing matters. You have to look at everything before you make the pick, but I agree tape is foremost. That said, projecting to the NFL isn't just about the tape. I think the best way to categorize what happens down here is these coaches get to see him up close and in a different environment, right? They've watched all the tape. Then they get to add this to it. They get to see the guys in a different scheme. They get to see how quickly they pick things up. They get to see if, was some of the stuff I saw on their college tape more of a product of the team and how they fit into that. Like, take, for example, Texas A&M. You have Shamar Turner, Shamar Stewart, Nick Scorton. Shamar Turner's not here because that leg injury flared up, unfortunately for him. Stewart came down here, but Scorton's not here because he's expecting to go in the top 15, and he's just one of those guys that didn't accept the invite. So there was a question. What's Shamar Stewart going to show us? Like, those guys combined last year for less than 10 sacks. That's insane to me because all three of them, well, Turner was being projected much lower, maybe day two, but Stewart and Scorton, first-round picks. Stewart had a sack and a half last year. I think Scorton had 3. That's insane to me. So why? Is there something about Stewart's game that I'm missing on tape? And so you get a chance to come down, see him in one-on-ones, see him in 11-on-11, see him against inside run sessions. And you know what I mean? You get to see him up close and personal in a different environment. And it just helps add more data to the spreadsheet, honestly, and help you make a better decision about, like, how will he be in our system? What tight end stood out that could be an alternative to Warren if he's gone at 18? So Loveland wasn't here, didn't get to see him, but one analyst said yesterday, best tight end class since 2010. Like all these guys look good. Let me grab my roster because there were even some guys that I just didn't know that had moments down here as tight ends. The kid from Oregon, Terrence Ferguson, had some good moments. Kid from Alabama, who I've heard some people say, CJ Dupree, just never really got used right, but absolutely is an NFL tight end. Thomas Fedone II out of Nebraska had some moments. Jake Brenningstool from Clemson looks a little bit more like a kind of a move tight end. He's a little bit slighter frame, but catches everything. But the guys that really stood out for me here were Elijah Arroyo of Miami and Mason Taylor of LSU. Those guys look like tight end ones on a team. And I think either of those guys would be an outstanding compliment to AJ Barner. And I don't think that we can assume that Noah Fant is not going to be on this roster in 2025. He's not going to be on the roster. Excuse me. He's not going to be on the roster at his current cap hit. There's no way. But there's an opportunity there if he fits a Kubiak offense. And I've read some analysis that maybe he doesn't. So that could be a factor. And he's open to staying here. He wants staying here. They could redo his deal again and just add a couple years onto it and lower the cap hit. But yeah, either of those guys, really impressive. And then Fannon's a guy that I just didn't really get a good evaluation of down here. But he was so productive at Bowling Green. Again, he's another guy I'm going to be watching closely for at the Combine. I just want to see what kind of athlete he is before I make a determination on him. Yeah. Yeah, Metal Dragon talking about all the factors. RAS testing, that's something that those guys do such a great job at over at that website, kind of compiling all that stuff into an overall grade. It's been a long time since John Schneider has given us any reason to trust his game plan on quarterback. Trust is earned. I do think Mike Mack has a better read than JS currently. Based on what? You think Mike McDonald has a better read on quarterbacks? Based on what? Now, John's track record of drafting quarterbacks, he just hasn't done it enough. But he's fallen in love with 3 quarterbacks in his career as a GM. One of them, Russell Wilson, took in the 3rd round. He became a borderline Hall of Famer. The other one was Josh Allen. Tried to trade Wilson to Cleveland to get that first pick that year that was used on Baker Mayfield to take Josh Allen, and fell in love with Patrick Mahomes in a year that not everybody was on the same page with Mahomes. He was a polarizing prospect. A lot of people thought the Chiefs were nuts moving up from 20 to 10 to get him. So when he has conviction about a quarterback, his track record's outstanding. So I don't know what you're talking about. I really don't. Are you talking about missing on Sam Howell? A, you don't know that he missed on Sam Howell. And B, he didn't go out and acquire him to be the starter. It was a really good way to get a second quarterback in that could be a good backup, could potentially win for you as a starter with some upside at $1 million a year when veteran backup quarterbacks, shitty ones, are costing you $5 million. So I'd say John's track record when it comes to quarterbacks is pretty darn good. All right, you guys, it's been almost an hour and a half. Thank you for the Wi-Fi. Whoever did, I think it's AT&T here. So shout out to AT&T for the Wi-Fi actually working and holding up today. There's 350 of you in here now. Really appreciate y'all watching and supporting the show. Shout out to BetUS for sponsoring the program as always. Here's the plan. So going to watch the Shrine game tonight. Follow me on Twitter at Seahawks Forever. I'll be tweeting the crap out of it. Be taking some notes. And then tomorrow, again, day off here. I'm going to go explore the city a little bit. I haven't. So here's something that I'll share with you. I thought I was going to come down and eat a bunch of home cooking while I was down here. Not home cooking, Southern cooking, right? Get some barbecue. Every Lyft driver, I was asking for their recommendations. A lot of seafood here. Go eat some oysters. I've had DoorDash every day. It's just, there's too much to do. And when I get back to the room, I have all this to do. And then I'm exhausted and I'm not in a key part of town. And so I'm going to get downtown, I think, and go treat myself to a nice dinner. But before I do that, I'll do 2 shows tomorrow. One is on who made themselves some money, the top 10 movers whose stock is up down here this week. And then And then I'm going to do a full, I said something else, didn't I? Oh, the Shrine Game reaction. I'm going to have to combine a couple of these into the show, into the same show, because I also wanted to do a Senior Bowl only live mock draft. But maybe I'll wait. Maybe I'll save that one until I get home after I've watched the game and the game replay. So let's do that. So tomorrow I'll recap the Shrine Game and maybe come up with a top 4 or 5 guys that I think really look like they could help the Seahawks from that area. And then I'll do the top 10 kind of movers and shakers, guys making their money down here in Mobile. Got a couple of late ones in here. Yeah, Bills had massive balls to draft Josh Allen given his college accuracy issues. Amazing it panned out the way it has. I love Mahomes as a prospect. This is my point. Thank you, Misfit. For those of you who think, oh my God, I want no part of Joe quarterback or Steve quarterback or Mark quarterback in the first round because ... right? Because you watched one bad game or you read somebody say they didn't like him or you saw a couple of bad reps. Josh Allen completed less than 60% of his balls at Wyoming. He had a good second half at the Senior Bowl, and he was big, strong, all those things. But there were a lot of people that the boom bust needle on Josh Allen was pretty wide. And there were people who thought that they were crazy taking him that high, and look how that's turned out. You take a guy shooting it upside. Allen could have been a bust in a different situation with a different coach. Maybe if he didn't have Brian Daboll as his guru the first couple of years, right? So you have to trust these teams more than yourself, unless you're someone that spends their life coaching and scouting football, in which case you should be doing it professionally, right? I have never, ever, and you'll never hear me say that I know more than someone else, especially not someone else who does it for a living. I may have conviction about a player. I'll tell you I disagree. Did that a bunch of times today with someone trying to tell me there's no way Elijah Arroyo and Mason Taylor are more talented than Harold Fannin. And I finally said, okay, I disagree. Check back with me later, right? So, yeah, when it comes to quarterbacks, they're obviously the one that get the most attention. Everybody watches them. Everybody thinks they know what makes a good quarterback. And I've been wrong about as many quarterbacks as I've been right about. I say this all the time, and I'll continue to call myself on this until the day I die. I thought Ryan Leaf was going to be a better pro than Peyton Manning. And maybe that wasn't just because I'm biased. I literally thought his skill set was one that was going to succeed in the NFL. I wasn't privy to the other stuff about the immaturity issues and everything other than what you just see in the public, right? But that the stuff that the coaches know about, although the Chargers obviously chose to overlook it. I'd hope to run into Ryan down here. I know he's been down here the last couple of days, had him on the show before. Would love to catch up with him if I can. Let's see here. I got a couple late ones. This is an interesting. Troy Peterson, why not make one of the running backs a change of pace receiver or an H-back? The Seahawks got to get creative to get more playmakers on the field together. I love this thought. There's more than one way to build a roster. And if that type of player that I described earlier, that I think might fit in really well with JSN and DK, a Tez Johnson type, right? A slot merchant. You can get that from a running back. And especially someone like Kubiak, who likes to play 21 personnel quite a bit too. He'll put 2 backs on the field at the same time, which is something I've been screaming for the Seahawks to do for years. I wanted to see Chris Carson and Rashad Penny on the field at the same time. Now, neither of them stayed healthy, but there was never that effort. And I've wanted to see Zach Charbonnet and Ken Walker on the field at the same time, or Zach Charbonnet and Ken McIntosh, or Kenny Walker, both Kens, the Ken backfield, the double Kens. Kubiak does that more. And so maybe you carry a 4th running back on the roster instead of just 3 this year. Now, is that George Halani? They like him, but maybe you add a 5th. Maybe you carry 5 running backs and only 5 receivers instead of 6 or 7 receivers. And you have a guy like Donovan Edwards that you can get on day 3 out of Michigan, who can run the ball for you, but also can damn near just play receiver. Even Jim Nagy said that on Monday himself. So absolutely, you can do something like that with a guy like that. It's It makes John Reese Plumlee really interesting, doesn't it? The former UCF. Was he UCF? I get all those smaller Florida schools all kind of confused. But remember, they signed him late in the season as a practice squad guy. They brought him in for a 30 visit last year, but he signed with someone else's practice squad. He was a dual threat quarterback, more of a runner than he was a thrower. And when they brought him back, there was a thought, I thought, when they brought him back, it was right before they played Arizona the first time. I thought, okay, here's a guy who was specifically brought in to be a scout team quarterback to emulate Kyler Murray, because they already had Jaron Hall in their practice squad. As it turns out, none of us knew this until the very, very last week of the year when they elevated him as a receiver. None of us knew. I reached out to Greg Bell. He didn't even know. Corbin didn't know. His athletic ability and the ability to maybe play some receiver, maybe some H-back kind of stuff. And then maybe play some trick plays, because remember, we just hired an offensive coordinator that comes from a team that had a guy named Taysom Hill, right? You see where I'm going with this? Was talking to my Lyft driver about this on the way over because she was a Saints fan. What if John Reese Plumlee gets placed in that Taysom Hill sort of role, where you can run some trick plays with him? He can throw the football, he can catch the football, he can run the football. That could be really cool. He could be a guy that kind of figures into that. Yeah. Dizzy91 says playmakers don't matter if our O-line doesn't give them time to deliver the ball or control the line of scrimmage for our running backs. Of course they don't. But you take top end talent, and you always have to take the premium positions and the skill positions. You have to get, when Pete Carroll was hired, he stood at the podium his first day and he talked about running the football, being physical. This is how we're going to dictate terms. This is the style of play. But you know what else he talked about? Touchdown makers. That's what he called them. Touchdown makers. But I wanted to put this comment up because I'm gonna keep saying this. I should just make a little 30-second video and then just cue it every time this comes up. For those of you who think the Seahawks are never going to fix their offensive line because John Schneider has always ignored it, you're wrong. They've missed on some evaluations. They haven't missed on the effort. That needs to be addressed and fixed. It's the same staff making the evaluations, right? But John Schneider knows that he has one thing. There's one aspect of this roster that has kept them from winning more than 9 or 10 games and going deep in the playoffs. It's the offensive line. He now has a head coach who, from the day he arrived, preached physical running game, being able to run it when teams know you're going to run it, being able to dictate terms on offense, complementary football. That's the style of play I want. Mike McDonald's going to demand it. So you have those two factors. And also this, if John doesn't fix it, especially if it doesn't try to fix it or improve it, I don't want to use the word fix, because fix implies getting rid of the whole group, which a lot of you think they should do. And that would be the worst idea ever. There's talent there. It's just all so young. It needs to develop. If John doesn't improve it, and the same thing prevents us from going further next year, I think John's out of a job. I keep saying it. None of you believe it. And John doesn't want to lose his job. There's not another job in the NFL that John wants. This is his home. Well, I'm in Mobile right now, but Seattle's his home. It's more, he wants to spend the rest of his life there. He and his wife are so entrenched there, and the two boys, and they love it. And that's where he wants to be. He needs to fix it for his head coach and for the team to get to where they want it to get to. We've seen him fix other problem areas that it seemed like for years he was ignoring. Look at the defensive line. Traded away Frank Clark because he didn't want to pay him. And then spent the next 3 years playing catch up and never having enough on the defensive line. And then they finally got there. They invested draft picks in back-to-back years in Boye Mafe and Derek Hall. And they went out and acquired Uchenna Nwosu. And they acquired Leonard Williams. And they paid him. And they drafted Byron, right? And they just kept stacking and adding up. They brought Jaron Reed back. They brought in Roy Robertson Harris. It's not enough. It's not enough to just add one Carlos Dunlap to that group and call it a finished product. He's going to do it. So try to set your cynicism aside and just watch what happens the next few months. They're going to add someone in free agency that you're going to like. And they're still going to address it in the draft if the board falls that way. But they're not going to give up on Olu Oluwatimi and Jalen Sundell and Satawa Lamea and Christian Haynes and Mike Jarrell and Anthony Bradford. They're not going to give up on all those guys at once, and they shouldn't. Go look at the Green Bay Packers offensive line. I'm not going to describe it to you again. I'm so freaking sick of talking about this. Just go look at their offensive line, where they were drafted, how much money they're making. And then go back and watch the tape of them manhandling our defensive front in that Packer game. There's different ways to build an offensive line. John knows that's the thing holding us back. They're going to go out and attack it. And on the first day here, it's all he watched. Arms folded, John stands. This is John Schneider. Hat pulled down. It was like he was incognito. He was trying to be disguised. Like everyone else, it's warm down here. It's 70 degrees. And he's wearing like a long sleeve, like puffy pullover and like these baggy pants. It was like he was just trying to blend in so no one would see him. He was just watching the offensive line. All the one-on-ones, all the individual drills, both sessions on Tuesday like this. So they're going to address it. Good point, Dizzy. He wasn't, but they saw something in him and they developed him. And now he's an elite player that everybody else wants. Right. So you have to, there's some risk. There's some risk in that. There's risk in taking any quarterback. But for any Seahawks fan to say, oh God, I don't want that guy at 18, there's just as much risk taking any other position. This is funny. I love, because I have all the respect in the world for Joe Marino. I would love to have met him down here, but I didn't see those guys. Lost his mind when his team took Josh Allen. That's right. He does Bills content. That's awesome. Yep. Misfit says I'd Blaine Gabbert over Cam Newton. Yeah. It's one of the things, honestly, it's one of the things that makes all this so much fun, right? It is a crapshoot. It's an educated, targeted crapshoot, right? It's like the term educated guess. Like that's basically what it is. You're making an educated guess on these players. And then it's up to you, because when you see the stuff on film that makes you believe the guy can be a good player, then you have to get that out of him. And so if Christian Haynes doesn't end up being a starter for the Seahawks, where was the failure? Was it in the eval? Or was it in the coaching staff? Sometimes it's not obvious. Sometimes it is. And this is kind of what I'm talking about. Like, I really like them both. I think they're outstanding foundational players that help you win, players who make an impact. But I don't think they'll ever be blue chip. By blue chip, I mean, to me, blue chip is all pro, the best of the best. You got to get all pro votes to be blue chip. Guys that are a problem, guys that coordinators have to scheme around. I don't think either of those guys are that. Very, very good players that I hope get second contracts and stick around here. But maybe because they're not obvious blue chips, maybe you don't have to pay that top end edge money. Maybe you don't have to pay $20, $21, $22 million a year to keep these guys, because I don't think they're that level of player. Doug Zillamonster, I agree. I really like Olu. When Olu was drafted, I said I think he's a 10-year starter in the league. But I said he might never make a Pro Bowl. There's value in that. Like, that's a really good player. Now, the question when it comes to Olu is if Kubiak, leans into strictly a wide zone run scheme, I'm not sure Olu fits that, but excellent pass protector, good leader in the locker room. I think he's a smart enough guy. He's played enough football that if they don't go out and acquire a vet, he could run Kubiak's scheme. But yeah, if they're going to make an upgrade there to bring in a guy like Ryan Kelly, if you feel like he has something left, okay. I hear a lot of Drew Dalman. I was down on Dalman coming out of Stanford in the draft just because he's an undersized guy. I'm kind of tired of undersized centers. I got tired of watching Joey Hunt and then Austin Blythe and those guys that are 6'1" and 290. I don't want that. And they brought in Nick Harris last year. He fit the same mold. I want a guy that can move some people. But yeah, that's a place. When I look at how I would address this offensive line, I would feel much better about adding a good solid vet to left guard and keeping Olu there than I would spending your free agent money on a center, because then I think left guard is still a need. Now, maybe that's the way to go. You go out and you sign a good veteran center, a guy you can count on, right? Because Connor Williams didn't work. Then you address left guard in the draft. It's a great draft for it. You get a starter there. I'll tell you a guy that I really, really loved, and I didn't mention earlier, is Miles Frazier out of LSU. And he got a lot of publicity. He got a lot of attention today because teams actually reached out to Jim and the staff here at the Senior Bowl and said, hey, we'd like to see him play some tackle. He's been so good this week. Let's see him play some tackle. But here's the thing about Miles Frazier out of LSU. Did I mention that? The way he's built is he's not a tackle. And he struggled on some reps today facing speed. Yeah, he's 6'5" and a third, 324 pounds, 33.5-inch arms. That's borderline good enough for tackle. But he gives me Damian Lewis vibes. And not just because of the LSU on the side of his helmet, the way he's built. His lower half is stout. He is strong. And he's a guy that's going to be drafted on day 2. And so if you went veteran center that upgrades that spot and can run Kubiak's scheme there, and then you take a guy like Miles Frazier in the 2nd or 3rd round, that's a win. That's a win, because Frazier just looked a lot like Damian Lewis, sorry. Yeah, good times. All right, guys, I think that's going to do it. Nice long show. Really appreciate it, as always. Follow me on Twitter, Seahawks Forever. Be tweeting during the Shrine Bowl. Blue Sky also. It's been so hard. I tried to be really active over there, but for sports, Twitter's where it's at. And I've just gotten better at muting and blocking all the other crap out of the way, so I could just focus on the things that I want to see on there, sports related. So, that's where to be with that. And then, of course, subscribe to this channel if you don't already, and hit that bell button. That way you get notifications. And I don't post so much that the notifications ever get annoying, I would hope. But I'm moving the show to a Monday through Friday daily live format in a couple of weeks. And so, it'll always be roughly around the same time, but not always at the same time. And so better to have those notifications. And if you want to support the show any other way, you can do that in the description down below. And I just want to say one more time, for those of you who tangibly supported my effort to get here and be here this week, means the world to me. And I can't thank those of you that do that enough. We're over 8,000 subscribers now. One of these days I want to double that, but one subscriber at a time. Really, really appreciate the support. This has been a game changer being down here, and I plan, the goal is to work to a point where this is what I do full time. And I can go, hit the first couple of days of the Shrine Bowl. Actually, next year, that's sort of the plan, is hit Dallas for a couple of days, then come here. And then I'd love to be able to get to the Combine. Not going to be able to do it this year. But if given the choice next year between this or that, I can't do both. I think next year I would do the Combine. Just be able to see those guys up close and really get a feel for how they are athletically. So anyway, thanks to you, because that's why I'm in a position to be able to even think about doing that and commit to more time to bring you content. It's the engagement that I love. That's why I've started to do more of the live rather than the pre-produced show. So that's it. Not going to play any music or anything. I'm just going to get the heck out of here, enjoy the Shrine game tonight, and then look for me and my 2 shows tomorrow. And then I'm staying here in Mobile until Sunday morning, flying out super, super early Sunday morning. So I will be able to get post-game stuff after the game, and then come and do a show Saturday night with my impressions of Seahawks prospects that I like down here, and guys that really stood out in the game. All right. So until next time, forever and always, go Hawks.